Right, good afternoon everybody. Welcome to the NAPA webinar of this afternoon, which of course is called, as you can see, Whether to Go Out. So my name is Sue, I'm from NAPA. I should have put my name on there rather than just NAPA. And I'm delighted to introduce you to Debbie Carroll from StepChange Design, who's going to facilitate the afternoon. If you've got any questions at all, pop them in the chat. We'll get to that later. If you've got any questions as we're going on, put them in the chat. So should be a good afternoon. So over to you, Debbie.
Thank you, Sue, and welcome everybody from wherever you may be joining us. We were just chatting before the record button about the virtual world, and I'm definitely a jeans and welly girl normally outside enjoying the weather. And if we were face to face on a workshop, I'm sure by now we would have chatted about where we're based, our journey, and perhaps what the weather was like where we are. I was going to ask Sue what the weather was like where she is, but I think she may have disappeared on me. Out the window here for me here in Southampton on the south coast, it's a bit of a cloudy day, but actually when I stepped out there earlier, it's absolutely lovely. The daffodils are out and the birds are singing, and I'm hoping that the birds are going to nest in my bird box soon. So welcome, and we are going to talk about the weather, but in a bit of an unusual way. So I hope that you find today's session useful, informative and enjoyable. So to kick off then, so what are we going to talk about today? I'm going to explain a little bit about who StepChange Design are and what we did as a research project on what makes engagement outside more active in care settings. And we'll introduce you to a tool we created from our research called the Care Culture Map that will help understand how to improve engagement with your outdoor space for your residents, particularly those with dementia. And we will explore this through the eyes of our relationship to the weather, with lots of anecdotes and stories along the way. You will find that I mentioned the word culture quite a lot during this session. So it's worth just reminding ourselves what we mean about culture. What is it? And what do I mean about it in this session? So there's culture everywhere. There's culture in our society, in our families, anywhere where people gather, within your care home, within your own friends groups. It's basically a shorthand for describing this is how we do things here. And so when I refer to culture, that's all I mean, how we do it here. So you may want to think of it as how you do it in your care home, or how you do it in your care organisation, or even in yourself, and the way that you think about various topics as we go through the webinar. So there'll be lots of anecdotes and small stories through the session. All of them are taken from our research project. We've anonymised the residents with the exception of one who we have permission to mention by name. And so they are real life examples from real care homes across England and Wales, from both within our study and from our wider work. So starting off with who are StepChange Design? Well, we're made up with myself, Debbie Carroll, and my colleague, Mark Rendell, who is currently in North Wales. So the weather there, I'm sure, is a little wetter and windier. It generally is whenever we chat about the weather. And we are both garden designers who had an interest in therapeutic garden spaces. And some of you may have heard us talk at NAPA events in the past. So these couple of first slides may be familiar to you before we get into the meat of the session. As garden designers, we also had backgrounds in project management, training and people development from other careers. And we had noticed that some care home gardens were not being used as much as you might expect, even after they'd been designed to the latest design guidance. This had us worried and we wondered what was going on. And so we decided to do a small self-funded research project. Well, that was the intention. And then NAPA, bless them, sent out an email to try and find recruits, and all you lovely NAPA members rallied to the cause, and we had 50 inquiries to take part across England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. And we scaled up to what has been termed one of the largest projects of its type. We had a deceptively simple question to answer. Why aren't care home gardens used more actively? And this was particularly in relation to people with dementia, though the findings did apply further and wider than just that. Our work took us deep inside care homes. We thought the answer lay in the design, but actually we ended up having to step inside your world of work. And as a result, we are changed as garden designers. It influences now the way that we work, and we see ourselves as standing both in the care sector, supporting care homes on active engagement outside for their residents, but also our designer colleagues on supporting care homes in a different way. So before a little more about that and our findings, I just want to share one sciencey slide. And actually it ties into the title of today's webinar, Whether to Go Outside. In reality, this is perhaps a misleading question, because actually the science has existed for decades that it is good for us to go outside. There's further research going on, but all of that just confirms what we have known for a very long time. The benefits of going outside increase our uptake of vitamin D, improve our mood, sleep and appetite, and for those with dementia can often reduce some of those symptoms that are associated with agitation and distress. All of us, particularly perhaps in this last year through the current health crisis, have perhaps been even more made aware of the physical benefits to our well-being, mental and physical, of being able to step into a green space, whether that be a garden, park or nature beyond. This is no less relevant for ourselves as it is for our residents that we may support within a care setting, and is especially important for those with dementia. So the question really is not whether to go outside. The question was the one that Mark and I had, is more important about, well, if we know it's good for us, why are we not going outside? And so our study got us to the answer, which was not what we'd anticipated. And so the key findings that we identified can be summarized as three key headlines. The very first of these is that there is a direct connection between how actively engaged outside a care setting is and how they deliver their care. The more person-centered or relationship-centered you are in your care practices, the more actively you will engage outside, regardless of the condition or design of your garden. You will naturally engage outside because your care is focused around delivering what your residents want. And if they wish to go out, you will be focusing on achieving that, regardless of your garden's state, as it were. There is an element that can hold you back though, and that is that if you have a fearful attitude around health and safety and feel hemmed in by health and safety, rather than actually understanding the reality of the application to allow safe active use outside, this will effectively cap your engagement. So it is important that you do need to overcome any fears around health and safety to get to the reality of how to safely enable your residents. There was one of the findings, the third finding, which was a shock to Mark and I as garden designers, and that was that actually you may not need a garden designer. However, there are times where actually you may need our expertise. And the best will in the world, us garden designers like to deliver our best gardens to help you engage outside. However, there is a high likelihood that we are likely to design beyond your capabilities. And so we identified that our design support must match your current care capabilities. So we need to understand your care culture. Now, this is a new thing for garden designers, and there can be a temptation to spend at will. It is better to understand your care practices first and to apply that knowledge so you can brief any designer more appropriately as to what you actually need rather than what you think you need. This in the long term can save you considerable money and unused gardens. What can happen is that your garden can become unused once the novelty has worn off of any new space. A lot of what I'm going to cover in this session today will cover some quick wins that need no money at all. So I hope that actually today's session will be informative and will not need the specialist knowledge of a garden designer. The one thing it does need is it does need you, the one resource that all the care settings have, and that is the most valuable resource of all, and that is your people. We will demystify a few of the common myths around needing to spend lots of money or that you need a pretty space. So I hope that you will realise as we go through that it is all about your people. So those are the three key findings our research identified for engaging more outside. To actually share this, we created a tool. We call it the Care Culture Map, which we're going to use through the rest of the session. Now, it looks quite complicated. It's very pretty with lots of pictures on it, but it looks quite complicated. But in reality, it is like any map. We're all on a map of the world somewhere. The key is to know how to read a map and to locate yourself. And then if you want to go on a journey, you simply need to work out where you are, where you want to go, and the route you wish to take. And you may need to know the obstacles in your way to avoid them. The care culture map is exactly that. This explains that care culture that I was talking about. And so it is made up of 7 columns that include a breakdown of culture, that complex topic that gets bandied around by managers in many different walks of business. The columns are broken down on our care culture map into things like health and safety, this pink column, the garden itself, the brown one, the organisation, the things in a garden, the people, so the teams, your staff, your family visitors, and most importantly, your residents. And all of them relate to a spectrum of care. So at the bottom of this culture map are homes and care settings that may be very task orientated, that may be fearful around health and safety, and where it's highly likely that the garden is unused or not really valued or is only used in very limited ways. Moving up this spectrum, about halfway up, you'll find this person-centred care. This is the measure that is used as the guide for England and Wales from the CQC of where we're aiming to achieve good quality care for all within care settings, and is commonly used as a benchmark. On our care culture map, it's only halfway up, because within our study, we saw an additional layer of what we referred to at the time as relationship-centred care. We refer to this as being like a family, where it actually is very blurred of who's the carer versus who's being cared for. And so this spectrum working on up shows an increasing level of engagement outside. Settings at person-centred and beyond are engaging naturally outside as and when a resident wishes to. And the top boxes in these statements that you read along on this tool identify that. The idea is very much to read the boxes and identify where you are. So that's "like us" is a great phrase. And then to work out where the obstacles are and move forward. These are the top 2 boxes, which actually really explain very well what high-performing homes do. So that it's normal for the garden to be used most days of the year. That would include in all weathers. And that the residents can engage with the garden meaningfully and doing activities there as and when they choose to do them. And so this is a picture of what high-performing homes look like. What is important to mention now is that culture change, wherever you are on this spectrum, requires a whole home approach, which is what NAPA ethos is about as well. You may not be able to change a whole home yourself, depending on your role so easily, but change across a whole home starts with an individual. So I hope that today, what I'm going to go on to share now, which is going to be around the weather, you can take on board, you can start to use, and feel free to share it with your colleagues. If you find what I'm covering is affirming for you, that actually you do the good parts of what I'm about to share, go away and share that too, and pat yourselves on the back for doing a great job. I hope with what we're going to cover now, I'm going to help you see through the eyes of the weather what the culture is. Because the one thing about culture is that when you're in it, it becomes subconscious and you can't see it anymore. And so we're going to make it more visible to you through some stories. So let's get back to the meat of the session with the weather. So I'm going to start with asking you just to ponder in your mind, what's being said about the weather in your care setting? What do you say about the weather in your care setting? Are you hearing phrases like, oh, it's too hot to go out, it's too cold, or it's too wet, let's wait till a dry day, it's too windy, we can't go out there, it's too blustery, we haven't got the right clothes, or let's wait for a nice sunny day? Are these the sorts of things that you're hearing? We can't help ourselves in Britain, we're obsessed by it, but we do talk about the weather, and we talk about it in both positive and negative terms. So if you're hearing these things, and what is behind them? So if you're hearing things like it's too hot, what is it that you're thinking? What do you mean by too hot? Are you worried about sunburn, dehydration for your residents? If it's too cold, are you worried about hypothermia? them getting a chill, or actually that perhaps it's icy and there may be slips or trips or falls. What we often came across was that actually very often these are disguising fears around health and safety. The great news, though, is that in as many homes as we saw these comments being made, we saw completely the opposite take. So we would hear an activity coordinator in a home saying, oh, what a beautiful hot day. Let's get the paddling pool out. Let's get the ice creams out. Or let's move the chairs under the shade of the canopy, or get the pergola, the parasols up. A good example in a very windy site, the activity coordinator in one of our study homes said to us that we actually can't go outside. The whole of our garden is always so windy. So as part of our study, we lent them a washing line. And they went on to do an activity where they identified a few residents who might like to help with hanging some washing. One lady in particular, it turned out to be something she really enjoyed doing. A gentleman was helping and he hung a pair of trousers and then sat down. But she carried on, hanging all the washing from the basket that the activity coordinator had gathered together. The gentleman, though, sat and laughed and said, I do love to watch women work. And it transpired that actually he'd really enjoyed sitting and watching his wife do exactly the same activity at home. This windy site now had become an opportunity to use the weather to their advantage. And for two particular residents, they had identified a connection that was meaningful in their past lives that they could bring forward into their new home. What becomes clear is that the weather is quite often talked about in quite black and white terms. Very often people will say either that it's a reason not to go, or actually it's an opportunity to go and do something in particular. And so you may want to just begin to listen more carefully to the language that's being said. Is the weather being used to defer a request by a resident who wants to go out, rather than to seek a way to make it happen regardless of the weather? Do you yourself do it? Why do you not want to go out? You may not want to go on a cold and wet day, but if a resident has requested it, maybe for them that was a natural day that they would have gone out. How can we make that happen? There's also a phrase which we'll come back to in a little while about there is no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. And you particularly hear this in relation to the Scandinavian countries. And so actually it's a little bit about turning it on its head. If you find that the weather is being talked about only in negative tones, is that hiding a health and safety fear that needs to be looked at? Or is this a deferral of avoiding actually allowing a resident to go out? So just thinking about that connotation that we just covered there, I just want to bring it back to the care culture map. So I've identified on it where person-centered sits on that spectrum we talked about. And so in an example where the home is saying things like it's too hot or too cold, and that's being given as the reason for not going out, we may well be seeing the mix showing that the weather conditions tend to be assumed to be unsuitable for going outside, and they're not checked or challenged. This is low on the care culture map. These care settings are often believed that the outside may be risky and more dangerous than inside, even though this may or may not be true. And it's quite common for these settings who feel this way towards the weather that the organisation is routinely risk assessing the elements, in this case the weather, and not the residents' ability to actually go out in that kind of condition. These homes tend to be low on our care culture spectrum and tend to be more indoor focused. So if you're finding yourself relating to this, and you may want to think beyond and before the current health crisis as well, conscious that there have been some additional restrictions on people during this time. So you may want to think a little before and as we come through and out the other side. So have a think. If you're down here, how could you perhaps reframe and think about the weather in a different way and not assume it to be unsuitable? Moving on up that spectrum, we had to mention the British obsession with the weather, that we love to talk about it. So if we've got anybody from overseas on here, you probably stereotype us And equally, those of us at home, who hasn't started a conversation with the weather? There is something quite unique about it. And sometimes we can have all 4 seasons weather in one day. There's a reason why we do use the weather. It's not just, it is a cultural thing for us, but actually it's also partly because it's a safe topic. It allows us an opener to start a conversation, whether that be with a friend, a family member, or a complete stranger at the bus stop. It requires of us no skills or knowledge about the topic at hand, but we can enter into a polite and easy conversation. And who knows where that conversation may lead? It's also a conversation that connects us to the outside. It actually is a shared thing. We are usually going through that weather together with the person you're speaking with. So immediately you have something in common. Within a care setting, it's also a conversation starter that could lead to unlocking information about a resident. Commenting about the weather and asking them what they like to do in that particular type of weather could actually elicit new information and ideas about activities that they might like to do at different times of year and through the seasons and different conditions. It can also, for people with dementia, help create the conversation that gets them to look out the window. So make sure that the way is clear to be able to get to doors and windows to see the outside. Stepping outside the door, if they can't see outdoors, actually can be quite difficult to encourage a stepping into the garden. If you've already made the connection through the door and the window by starting a conversation about the weather and pointing it out, you'll stand a greater chance that they will then go on to engage. In another care home, they had a wash line already, and so we lent them some new really colourful tea towels. Some had flags on, some had funny pictures on, and we hung them up outside. And in one of their records that they identified, a resident noticed these tea towels and made the comment to the activity coordinator that he needed to go outside to get the washing in because it was going to rain. It's a really good example of how something so simple triggered a connection back to the weather. And in another home that was actually very high performing on our spectrum, they had identified a lady for whom the only reason she'd have gone out in her busy family life would have been to hang her family's washing. She ended up doing the care home's actual laundry and hanging the tea towels and the tablecloths every day for them. She would often go in and out 2 or 3 times a day, popping the washing out when it was sunny and bringing it in when it looked like it was going to rain, only to pop it back out again. And then, of course, bringing it in when it was dry. Her awareness of the weather hadn't dimmed, even though many of her other facilities of being able to engage in different, more ordinary ways were deteriorating. It was important, though, as simple as this task was, it was the fact that the care setting had identified and learnt about this resident enough to know that this was the meaningful engagement for her, the connecting outside. In some ways, the weather is a 24/7 resource alongside nature. It is there waiting to be used as an additional activity coordinator. It just is waiting for you to invite it to take part and join your team. All it needs is for you to start the conversation. And so with the examples I've just described, what you're often seeing in these sorts of homes where that conversation is started is that they are using it to sense check the myths around the weather. And so you've got staff who recognise the need to point out and initiate activity or conversation. These sorts of conversations won't happen unless you get them started. They very often won't happen on their own. But importantly, the conversation isn't the end of the game. The conversation is the starting point to learn more information about your residents and to allow you to look at the unspoken rules and assumptions and norms that are going on in your care setting and to challenge and sense check them against the reality of what is safe, appropriate to do. And if health and safety is being used as a reason not to take place outside, then it's working out how to safely enable that activity to resume. So it may lead on to, the questioning may lead to actively questioning the myths and looking at actual legislation of what you can do as opposed to what you can't. The important thing is that staff begin to recognise the need to point out and initiate things, which leads to the residents showing an interest in their outside space. This greater awareness of staff of the weather conditions outside actually can help create the connection to the outside. You may want to look at which way your chairs face. Do they look outside or inside? If they're looking outside, you're more likely to create a natural conversation. You might want to use the weather forecast on the TV and have a weather board inside that shows what the weather's like outside. The important thing is that conversations about the weather are not just a conversation starter. They are a means to find out more so that you can then build on the information you know and can act on it to build in appropriate activities that suit that resident and the time of year and the conditions outside. So, how weather ready are you? Along with our care culture map, it comes with a handbook, and within this there's a theme we call weather aware and weather ready. I can never quite say that. And it covers two simple aspects. What's the real feel outside? So is it really how it looks? And also that question that I raised earlier around there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. Overcoming these two areas sets you on the road to being weather ready. And the important thing about this step on our care culture map is that this has to be overcome if you are to reach truly person-centered. If you do not overcome it, you will not be able to respond easily to that request by a resident who says they want to go out and to act in that moment if you are not prepared. So let's just start and unpack what's behind the real feel. This is really about what does it really feel like outside as opposed to what we think it is. And we had a great story from one of our study homes in Wales. We turned up on our first visit there on a care home open day, so they had lots of activities going on, all of which turned out to be inside. And yet actually, when we did a tour of the garden with the care home manager, outside was actually perfectly comfortable. It did look a little cloudy, fairly typical for Wales, and but actually it was more than comfortable outside. This was in May, June time of year. And so we asked the question of, was there any activities they had planned that they could take outside? To their credit, that afternoon, they moved the booked singer to the outside. And over the course of the afternoon, at some points, we had virtually all of the care home outside enjoying the comfortable weather. It may not have been brilliant sunshine, but it was more than comfortable to sit outside and enjoying the singer. And in fact, the party was going in such full swing that around about 4 o'clock, they got a call from the local police after a complaint from the neighbours. Could they turn the music down? This didn't put them off. If anything, it actually inspired them. I'm not suggesting you go around annoying all your neighbours by having raves in your care home gardens. But actually, it just inspired them of what was possible outside and that they had dismissed the outside as not being suitable because it looked a grey, overcast day. So step outside, take a feel what it's really like and what do you need to make that a comfortable visit? Or depending on what it's like, what does this inspire you that actually you could do out there to suit the weather conditions? So if it's an icy day, is this a day to fill the bird bath so that the birds can have a drink because it was all iced over? Or actually go for a walk and come in for a hot drink, feeling all virtuous for having made the effort to go out on a colder day? Or is it that windy day and it's perfect for drying the washing? Or actually just a sunny day with a cuppa in a sunny corner? What's the real feel? Step outside, maybe even get a resident to do it for you. And maybe on your weather board, if you have one, you could even do some hints and tips that says, you know, it's sunny out, but there's a cool breeze, you might need your cardi. Give a hint and a tip that's real, that actually makes it feel real. So think about the simple tasks. But this leads on to the sort of second aspect related to this. Knowing what the actual weather is like actually leads us to what's the appropriate clothing. And we saw several both good and bad examples within various care settings around this scenario. In one home, a lady, we'll call her Jenny, that she walked constantly. There was free rein to go into the garden, though sadly she was rarely interacted with by anybody throughout her entire day. She walked through the homes, she walked around the garden and back in and repeated that throughout. She must have covered some miles. Whenever we saw her, I found it quite distressing, if I'm honest. Every day, regardless of the weather, whenever we saw her, she was in a light top and always in her slippers. I guarantee that if she had fallen, which is more likely if she's in her slippers outside, it would have been the garden that had got the blame and not the inappropriate footwear. Knowing this lady actually walks so much and goes outside so often, there had been no consideration that her clothing should reflect the weather on any particular day. In contrast, in the image here, you see a lady, this is Mrs. Miller. This is her real name. We have the permission from her family to refer to her. This is her with a carer in her care home, in the snow, wrapped up with her thick coat and her hat and her sturdy shoes, going for her daily walk in the garden, come rain or shine. She always had a dog and walked every day, and in fact her dog had joined her in her care home for a while. Sadly, her dog had passed away, but the care home made sure that if she wished to go, she still went for her daily walk, regardless of the weather, but she was appropriately dressed for it. In her case, there was no such thing as bad weather. It was just about wearing the right clothing. So you might want to think about, with the weather, what clothing do you put your residents in? And this conversation may need to start at the beginning of the day. And the more that you know about your residents, the more appropriate this can be. So if you know you've a resident who loves to go outside regularly, how about dressing them from the start of the day so that they're ready, prepared to be able to engage spontaneously and easily when they wish, or to have their clothing to hand to add an extra layer, or maybe a coat near the door. It may be that you have some generic coats or blankets or a brolly. Now, I understand in the current times there may be some difficulties around infection control, and there may be a need to work out how to do this safely in each setting depending on your particular layouts and approach. But actually enabling someone to be able to act in the moment, especially with dementia, is key. So think about your different residents and which ones might want to go out. Equally, a conversation around people's preferences about what to wear for different activities. So some people may have their favourite clothes to do their gardening in, or to go for a walk in, or their favourite outfit to sunbathe in, or to attend a garden tea party in. Dressing someone with dementia in appropriate clothing to suit the task that they're going to go on to do can also act as a cue that may help and aid positive engagement into that activity. It sets them up for the day. So these are a few things you may want to think about. But there's one last little piece in this that often gets overlooked. You may have got your residents in the right clothes. They may have coats near the door or a brolly. But what about you? So a resident wants to go outside and it's pouring with rain. You've got your brolly for them or a mac for them. What have you got? Have you got a coat to wear too? And I know what can happen is that we end up back at our first set of slides of saying, oh, it's too wet today, Jenny, we won't go today. That seems such a shame, and we've missed an opportunity. But actually, I don't think any of us could blame you for saying exactly that. So how can you make sure that you have the right clothing to hand, that you're ready and dressed for a day that might involve stepping across the threshold into the garden too, or that there are things to hand for you to be able to use easily and quickly to respond to a resident's wish to go out in the spontaneous moment. So a few things to think about on how weather ready you are. So care settings that are at the weather aware and weather ready area often have checked the actual weather conditions, which prompts them to make sure that activities are suitable to suit those conditions in the season, and that clothing required for that outdoor activity may be appropriately available or already in place. and that these clothing cues can be used to help residents recognise the seasons and conditions and make it easier to create engagement. All of these things can lead to the weather-aware organisation, so they're ready and prepared. This is a stage that if you're not at this point yet, this is a bit to start to think about, what would I need? How would we do this in our setting? What would make this happen? Because actually this is about fulfilling the right that you understand it's everyone's right to have the opportunity to have fresh air and an opportunity to step outside. This section of our care culture map has to be overcome if you are to achieve truly person-centred care and respond to a wish by a resident to go outside. And so we're moving into this upper territory, above person-centred and into relationship-centred. And this area is the bit where, if you're not at this stage yet, it can feel quite daunting, and often we hear the myths around you need more people, more money, and a pretty space. In reality, in our care study that we did, the homes we saw had nothing more different than any of the other homes in our study. In fact, one of the homes had a major staffing incident during our study, and yet engagement outside was seen as essential for those residents that required it. Otherwise, they were more difficult to care for. It is an attitudinal shift rather than a need for more of something. And so I just want to share some examples with you that actually help to paint that picture for you. One of the key things that underpins homes at this end of the spectrum is that they often just don't want to let a beautiful day go to waste. And that beautiful day may be windy or rainy or snowy as well as sunny. And they want to make engagement happen when a resident wishes to do it, or in line with their normal wishes and likes about the outside. And they are ready and prepared to act in the moment, or to plan in for things that they know residents would enjoy looking forward to. So in one of these examples, I apologise about the small picture here, but on this picture here at the bottom, you can see there's a little lady in a chair. I deliberately have shown the larger garden. It's a very bland garden with just some tables and chairs, and there's a big shadow coming from the building. And in this home, this lady, we call her Maggie, she loved to sunbathe. And the care setting had learned about this early on in getting to know her. And so whenever the sun came out, they would pop her outside with a chair and her favourite sun hat. And then throughout the course of the day, all of the staff knew that this was Maggie's love, to sit contentedly in the sunshine. And whenever anyone was around and about, they would pop their head out to make sure that she was still sitting in the sun, as this shadow from the building would move across the garden. As a consequence, she was a bit like a natural sundial. She would move round the space. In terms of time and resources, it needed very little input. She sat there contentedly. But there was a spin-off. Because Maggie was out there, others would go to join her. And we saw many an unprompted tea party take place around Maggie. She was already there, others went to see what was happening, and so more people joined her. It needed very little, except the early exploration to have learnt that this is what Maggie likes to do. In another home, we have an example in the snow. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of William in the snow, so I've used Mrs. Miller again. But William actually loved to be outside from morning till night, literally. And in fact, if he couldn't be outside, and he'd been an outdoor man all his life, if he couldn't be outside, he was quite problematic, both to himself and to his fellow residents. He loved to tidy, sweep and clean, and he had his own broom and shed and bin. In actual fact, they weren't his. They got called his. They were just part of the normal resources this care home had, but they enabled him to use them. And he would spend all day outside. When the snow came, they risked assess him for his abilities to be able to go out and to continue to engage in the outside, knowing that for him to stay inside all day would have been much, much harder work on everybody and distressing for himself. They found that he was physically fit. All that sweeping had kept him quite fit. And so he was given a snow shovel and he swept all of the paths around the care home and had a whale of a time and helped with the actual functionality of the home. Now, I'm not suggesting that in all homes all residents are capable of carrying out these tasks. The important thing here was that they had risk assessed him, not the weather. Yes, it was icy and slippy out, but actually he took on the task of making it safer to go out for others. They had risk assessed that he was capable of carrying this out. They gave him the tools to do the job. He was given some supervision to make sure he was underway, but actually he enjoyed a happy day feeling productive. Don't forget yourself as well in this. In terms of making the most of the day, you'll see on this right-hand side, we've got a chap call him Warren. He's a carer, and we witnessed it quite often that towards the end of his shift, if it was a nice day, he'd write his care notes up outside at the table, and he'd have his MP3 player there, and he'd take requests from other residents who came to join him. In the short time that he was writing up his care notes, he went from being alone to having 17 people joining him around the table, having their afternoon tea while playing music on his MP3. He still got the job done. He got his care notes written and handed over to the next shift, but he'd made sure that the beautiful day hadn't gone to waste. He knew that activity bred activity and people came to join him. And so he had taken his work outside, and he had a thoroughly enjoyable time doing his notes. So what work do you do that you could also take outside? In all of these examples, it took virtually no financial investment in equipment at all, or nothing beyond what they actually already had. What it took was an approach to not let that beautiful day go to waste, and to make the use of that free activity coordinator, the weather and nature. And they used it to the full, leading to contented and meaningfully engaged residents. So I hope you can see that those are all very simple activities that many homes would be able to achieve, and many of you may be doing, I'm sure. So these high-performing homes very much identified by the fact that they risk assess the residents and not the elements in order to maintain their ability and to actually use the resources that they have safely, but it's about the resident and their ability to do things. And that those residents who expect or want to go outside are dressed for those spontaneous visits, which leads back to those top two areas we mentioned earlier of residents being able to engage meaningfully and actively outside, doing things they wish as and when they wish, and that these things will happen most days of the year. It is possible to move up through this map, but actually it's really important to not take leaps. If you found yourself resonating with the lower part of the map, don't worry. The important thing is to start your journey. But to make big leaps, be careful. All the changes must be embedded across your whole home. It would be inappropriate for a home who is struggling with their health and safety low down here to immediately give everybody a snow shovel and go out in icy weather without having understood what they need to put in place to safely enable an activity outside, and which of their residents they know enough about to actually make that happen. Important thing that underpins it all is knowing your resident at this end of the care culture spectrum. Investments in your people and in listening and learning and sharing that information across the whole home is what embeds this change and can lead to greater engagement outside. So to sum up the key things that the weather has taught us, I guess, in our care culture journey that we've just done in the last half an hour, these are some quick wins you can go away and try for yourself, share with your colleagues, and just see and sense check where you are now. So go and have a conversation about the weather. It's simple to do, and we're actually used to doing it in the UK, but listen more carefully to the answers you hear. What is really going on behind the conversation? Make that culture that's in our subconscious visible. Are we really seeing the weather as a positive thing or actually as an obstacle, and how might we overcome this? If we use the weather as a reason to not go outside, start to question the myths and check your perceived risk against the reality, and look for ways to help make safe enabling of engagement outside despite the weather. Go check the real feel. Is it as bad as it looks? And actually, even if it isn't a nice day, for some residents, that may be still the perfect day for them, and they may wish to go out for a breath of fresh air. Be prepared to then dress them for the right weather and yourselves, and be prepared to go out spontaneously and for pre-planned visits. The important underlying thing on all of this is to remain curious about your residents so that you can act in the moment and help them live a meaningful life within your care setting. And so that all of you and all of us need this, as the science shows, is good for us. It's important that we don't let a beautiful day go to waste. So I hope those give you some really quick wins to take away, and share with you a little bit about a journey of increasing engagement outside. Our aims at StepChange Design are very much to enable care home residents, particularly those with dementia, to be able to engage outside as and when they wish, and to support you to ensure that your spaces are well used, well loved, and an active part of your residents' lives. And we can do this through a number of different routes. So the Care Culture Map tool and handbook we've mentioned, and is available on the NAPA website, and they get a donation from us for all of those sales. We also have a poster, small A3 poster, that has some inspiring statistics of making engagement outside happen. We do training, workshops and presentations like this one, and we hope to be doing a workshop for NAPA in the coming months. So look out for more on that. And we obviously still do some design and guidance on those areas too. You'll also find lots of free helpful articles that we've written on our download page of our website. And there's 5 articles, I think it is now, that we've written for NAPA that you may, as activators and those sorts of roles, find particularly useful because they were written with you in mind. So take a look at some of those, and hopefully that you may find some further insights beyond just the weather. So if you want to keep in touch, these are all of our details. And I think probably Sue is going to let me know whether we've got a whole load of questions and whether there's anything that you wish to ask. So if you haven't put some questions in the chat box, feel free to do so now, and we can work our way through them. I hope you found it useful.
I certainly did. Thank you very much. It was really good. Haven't got any questions in there at the moment, but do feel free to pop a question in there, or a comment or anything else. If you think it's a great webinar, then just whack your comments in. I will be sending around details of the website to all the attendees, so they'll have that information, and I'll put a link to the download page so everyone can actually see that.
I could stop sharing that page then, if that helps. If you're going to send that out,
oh, there we go.
I'll get it on the life size almost, with my lockdown hair.
We've all got lockdown.
Are there any questions?
I don't think there are. So obviously your webinar was very informative, and it was. I mean, every time I hear something, I always learn something. So it's been great. So
people always email me if they've got other questions. If you send out our details, then
I'll put all the details on the thing. So
any questions directly as well.
Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you all very much for attending. The recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel within the next week. It will go up there. So if you want to watch it again, and any questions at any time, please do contact us. So goodbye, Debbie. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye.